This week, One Piece not only presents to us more details about the Void Century and its connection to the people of Elbaf and their adoption for the sun god Nika, but also gives us an insight into Dragon and Vegapunk's relationship, how the two might have been working together to use Bartholomew Kuma and the Pacifista Seraphim army to turn the cards against the world government. Welcome to Chapter Secrets, where we break down all the details in every One Piece chapter. Let's begin. Shaka continues from the details from last week by mentioning a certain man who, among archaeologists, spent his life trying to find out about this immense kingdom, as well as how, at a certain location, a machine was unearthed that matched the date of manufacture to that period of time, leading to the theory that said kingdom really did possess advanced technology. The question, though, is if this machine is just a plot device for the sake of proving this theory, or if this machine is an item of relevance that will tie later into the story. After all, the person in question is no doubt likely Professor Clover from Ohara, who had already mentioned back during Robin's flashback as how the discovery of the ancient kingdom came from both the poneglyphs as well as some existing documents and other things from that time period. Shaka continues elaborating details on the Void Century that we already knew about, but putting them into better perspective, and also talks about Clover's past, how in his youth he was someone who researched the world, gathering books and information about the Void Century by adventuring throughout the world. He became known as the world's greatest archaeologist, which is a title that in Japanese is somewhat similar to, for example, the world's greatest swordsman that Zoro is aiming for, making Clover the greatest in his field. This is a title that I think would be very fitting if it was given to Robin by the end of the series. Shaka then explains how the scholars managed to save the books from the library of Ohara, making for a victory by Ohara against the government, and allowing to let that library live on, which you are seeing with your own eyes right now. This connects us to the scene where Olvia told Robin how they shouldn't give up on the future that children like Robin will live in. This is not only perfectly fitting for a futuristic arc like Egghead, but it perfectly encapsulates how understanding the past is the key to building a prosperous future. Robin begins crying from this statement, but the other Straw Hats get angry at Vegapunk for making her cry, with Sanji cursing Shaka and Nami calling him Helmet, a nickname much like Luffy would. Vegapunk, however, mentions how having gone to Ohara on that day 22 years ago, he found out that giants were pulling out books from the lake to escort them to Elbaf. These are actually not just any giants, since you might be able to recognize who they are. On the top appears to be Hyrudin, to the right of him Girth, and below him Goldberg, all members of the new giant warrior pirates who are part of Luffy's grand fleet. Leading them, as Dragon claims, is a man with bandages covering his entire body, that person seemingly being the man seen later in the chapter, who is none other than Jaguar D. Saul. Now obviously this is a big deal because it means that Saul survived the Ohara incident, but before you go calling this a fake death by Oda, you have to keep in mind how Saul was never confirmed to have died. In fact, Aokiji entrapped him in what he called an ice time capsule. And what is a time capsule? Well, something that is stored within a capsule to be then accessible again at some point in the future, meaning that the point of the attack was to encase and protect what's inside for the future. Furthermore, we already saw both Luffy and Robin getting frozen by Aokiji in very similar ways and still surviving after being thawed afterwards, meaning that Saul, very much the same way, never really died as Kuzan let him live. However, because of that, he had to go into hiding, likely at Elbaf, and couldn't really meet up with Robin again because she was always on the run, impossible to reach. Now, the interesting thing is that Saul noted how he wasn't a giant from Elbaf, but perhaps he still was in good enough terms with his fellow tribesmen that he convinced them to help him out. This makes sense since it's already been implied in the story that the giants were once allies of the immense kingdom. After all, they venerate the sun god in their culture, celebrating their winter solstice, the rebirth of the sun, which is literally just on our way toward out the dawn of the world. Not to mention how they are not affiliated with the world government and how they've kept all humans away from their island with an isolationist policy for many years, similar to stories like those of the Wano country or the Ming tribe, only allowing people like Carmel in after she helped save so many giants and earned their trust. So it makes sense that being old allies of the kingdom, they would want to preserve the information of Ohara, so they transferred all of those books to Elbaf to allow the library of Ohara to live on. This makes me wonder perhaps if it could even be possible that the final road poneglyph is found on Elbaf, making it the perfect next destination to find out many details about the Void Century, and Saul could perhaps even be the man known as Fire Scar, which would explain why so little is known about his whereabouts since he is in hiding. Really, the only flaw in that theory is that Saul doesn't really have any apparent fire scars. That his body is covered in bandages, he was mostly just injured from bruises and then frozen over, so can it really be said that he bears a fire scar? Well, I guess we'll see. Going back to Hara though, we see a young Dragon and Vegapunk meeting with each other. As for the former, this is Dragon at age 33, where he was simply known as the captain of the Freedom Corps, which is implied to be a small organization on a much smaller scale than the Revolutionary Army that he was leading before. The most notable feature is the lack of a tattoo on his face, much like in Roger's execution, though the pattern of his tattoo is found on a band around his leg. He already had a tattoo in Luffy's flashback 10 years later, so he must have gotten it during that period, likely during the formation of the Revolutionary Army. His outfit is also almost certainly inspired from that of Fidel Castro, the famous revolutionary of the Cuban Revolution, who Oda already confirmed basing part of Dragon's character design from, with even the symbol of the revolution, the star, being visible on his outfit. As for Vegapunk, I'd like to talk about him and his design later. At this moment, Dragon speaks of the future efforts of the Freedom Corps and speaks of wanting to form an army that will allow him to change the world. This would become later that year the Revolutionary Army, with founding members Dragon, Ivankov, and Kuma. However, what's interesting is how Vegapunk mentions that Dragon is someone who usually despises warmongering, which gives us better insight into how Dragon is someone who really values peace. This ties with what Oda mentioned of Dragon's character in his Vivre card, explaining how he's someone who dislikes war and strives for peace, but sees the fighting of the Revolutionary Army as necessary sacrifices, not victories to relish in. This vision of Dragon to change the world that he shares to Vegapunk might mean that he has a plan in mind on how to achieve that the two might have been working on over for the past several years, and I have a good idea about what that might just be, as I think Dragon and Vegapunk's connection would finally explain absolutely everything about Kuma if we start thinking about it. Thinking back at when Kuma was first properly introduced in Thriller Bark, Moria was very shrewd and saw through Kuma's plans pretty clearly. He stated that Kuma was the only Shichibukai to be extremely devoted to the government and trying to earn their favor, but was certain that Kuma had a plan he was plotting for acting so nice and well-behaved to the government, something that Kuma asked Moria to keep his nose out of, which he agreed to since it didn't really matter to him. Interestingly, Kuma was already a very observant man, as he very well understood that Blackbeard's promotion to Shichibukai would completely upset the balance of the world, so he's clearly had a very good grip on the larger situation and has a plan on his own, which is why he acts so nice with the government. This means that committing to the Pacifista project was likely part of some grander plan for Kuma, and that's likely where Vegapunk ties in with Dragon. Kuma had told Rayleigh that even now becoming a robot, he was still an undercover agent of the Revolutionary Army, which means that him allowing himself to become like this was likely under a mission for the Revolutionary Army. But if Dragon was in on it and was this close with Vegapunk, then evidently Vegapunk was in on the mission as well, starting the entire Pacifista project for Dragon's sake. This could also further mean that Vegapunk might have backed up Kuma's consciousness somewhere, be it hidden in his body or in a computer in his labo, which means that Kuma might very well come back to life in some form, leading to an emotional reunion with Bonnie. Still, this is kind of a massive deal, and it's something that I and many others have speculated for years, that the Pacifista project in its entirety might be the Revolutionary Army's hidden trump card. And what a trump card it would be, because if Vegapunk has found a way to secretly control all the Pacifistas at his behest, then that could very easily turn the cards against the world government. Think of it like Vegapunk pulling an Order 66 and turning all the Pacifista against the government thanks to Kuma, completely destabilizing the power force of the Marines in the Revolutionary Army's favor. This would explain why Fujitora insisted so much that the government's power be shifted to the SSG's Seraphim project, as that might be a way to help reform the Marines and the government. That might be why the government is becoming more wary of Vegapunk and are trying to kill him, but the Straw Hats being able to protect him might give him enough of an edge to properly execute his plan. Anyway, as we close the flashback, Vegapunk explains how he has inherited all the secrets of the world into his head to progress his research, which explains how he was able to develop many of these inventions. He then, however, decides to take the Straw Hats deeper into the labo, deep into a chamber to show them a certain something. But what could this be? Is it tied to the kingdom like an old machine, or is it perhaps something related to the truth of Del fruits, such as how he has been able to secretly clone many other Del fruits, just like Senor Pink's fruit we saw in action with the Jinbe Seraphim last chapter. Also, as a small detail, Shaka's outfit bears the kanji Sei on his back, which stands for his punk designation, good. Back at the scrapyard though, Luffy and Chopper try to get the robot to move, calling it Robonosuke or Robo-King. However, suddenly a man appears in the middle of the robot, as you can see if you zoom in on the panel. This turns out to be Vegapunk Stella, the original body, who claims to have been testing teleportation technology but ended up getting stuck in the middle of the robot. Luffy manages to pop him out, but Vegapunk actually recognizes him, claiming him to be Dragon's kid and how he was expecting him. This is likely due to the fact that Kuma told him about Luffy, so Vegapunk was hoping he would come here. Similarly, Bonnie recognizes him, and Vegapunk recognizes her back as Kuma's kid. Vegapunk tells them to pull the lever on their dumb shoes to fly, though this sends the group flying into the sky, which might even let them reach the labo phase to regroup with the others. This makes sense as this technology is fairly similar to what Germa uses to fly, which we coincidentally happen to see in the cover story this week as well. However, as they soar through the skies, we finally get a good look at Dr. Vegapunk after all these years, the original Stella body in this case. He's introduced with the title of Squad Leader of the Special Science Group, or SSG, as his lab coat indicates, as well as the epithet of Man with the World's Greatest Brain, with a title similar to that of Clover or Mihawk as mentioned before. Furthermore, Vegapunk speaks by adding quasar at the end of his sentences, which refers to the immense cosmic energy found within black holes. It is something that relates to the research of Albert Einstein. This is one heck of an Oda design, which is undoubtedly based on that one of history's most famous scientists, Albert Einstein, with his iconic mustache and the long tongue coming out of his mouth. This in particular is inspired from an iconic picture of Einstein where he, and I'm not joking, photobombed a picture that was taken of him in a car as he didn't want to be captured in that moment, but that picture went down to become one of the most iconic photographs ever made. Really though, Vegapunk's most distinguishing feature is the colossal giga brain on his head as seen during his youth. As he has become so intelligent, his brain just kept growing, which Dragon even mentions how it grew even further than before as he's grown even wiser and smarter. This stretching has even stretched his forehead to the point that his eyebrows stand much higher than his face, much like the picture of Einstein. This is actually something that we even knew for a very long time, as we could see in Vegapunk's silhouette back in Punk Hazard, his long mustache and the long stretching head. In the present, however, Vegapunk is currently 65 years old. Not only does Vegapunk look even more like Einstein, but the head has been completely cut open too, with instead an apple being found on top of it. This is likely what happened when he split his mind into 6 bodies, as his brain literally grew so gigantic that he was able to slide it into 6 pieces, much like cutting up pieces of an apple, and fit those 6 pieces of brain into 6 bodies as fully functioning living beings, with each of them inheriting a different trait of Vegapunk's personality. Vegapunk himself embodies all those traits, being wise and intelligent, but also wacky and silly. Not only have we finally met all of the Vegapunks, but we are also beginning to figure out the mysteries of the Void Century that have been preserved by the people of Ahara, and we may very well find out more about the truth of Devil Fruits very soon. The will of Ahara lives on.